Sarah Williams felt the handcuffs click around her wrists and heard the crowd gasp behind her. "You have the right to remain silent," Officer Peterson shouted as cameras flashed and phones recorded. But Sarah wasn't silent. "I am Judge Sarah Williams of Millbrook County Superior Court," she said with steel in her voice, "and you just made the biggest mistake of your career." The officer laughed cruelly. "Sure you are, lady. That's what they all say." Little did he know that in 30 seconds, his world would crumble and hers would change forever. This is the story of how one moment of injustice became a lesson the entire nation would never forget. The rain had been falling hard on the streets of Millbrook that Tuesday morning, washing away the summer heat but not the tension that seemed to hang in the air like heavy clouds. Judge Sarah Williams sat in her new black Mercedes at the red light on Main Street, her mind already focused on the full docket waiting for her at the courthouse. At 52 years old, Sarah carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every bit of respect she commanded. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant bun, and she wore a simple navy blue dress that spoke of professionalism without trying too hard to impress anyone. But beneath that composed exterior was a woman who had fought for everything she had achieved. Sarah's story didn't begin in privilege or comfort. It began in a tiny two-bedroom apartment above Mrs. Chen's grocery store on the south side of Millbrook, where she lived with her grandmother after her parents died in a car accident when she was just 7 years old. Grandma Rose Williams was a woman who stood barely 5 feet tall but had the heart of a giant. She worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table and Sarah in school. Every morning before dawn, she would wake up to clean offices downtown. During the day, she watched children at the community center. At night, she took in laundry from neighbors who could pay her a few dollars to wash and iron their clothes. "Sarah, baby," Grandma Rose would say as she folded clothes late into the night. "Education is the one thing in this world that nobody can take away from you. No matter how poor we are, no matter what color our skin is, no matter what people say about us, if you got knowledge in your head, you got power." Those words became Sarah's North Star through everything that followed. When kids at school made fun of her secondhand clothes, she remembered her grandmother's words. When teachers lowered their expectations because of where she lived, she proved them wrong with straight A's. When guidance counselors suggested she consider more realistic career goals than becoming a lawyer, she worked twice as hard to prove she belonged. The journey from that small apartment to the courthouse had taken 37 years of relentless determination. Sarah graduated valedictorian from Millbrook High School, earned a full scholarship to State University, and finished in the top 5% of her law school class. She spent her first 10 years as a public defender, fighting for people who reminded her of her younger self, people the system had written off before giving them a real chance. During those years, Sarah met and married David Williams, a social worker who shared her passion for justice and helping others. Together, they raised 2 beautiful children, Marcus, now 18 and heading to college in the fall, and Jasmine, 15 and already talking about following in her mother's footsteps. 3 years ago, when the governor appointed Sarah as the first black woman judge in Millbrook County, the local newspaper ran a front-page story with the headline, "From Public Housing to Public Service." Sarah kept that newspaper clipping in her desk drawer, not out of pride, but as a reminder of how far she had come and how many people were counting on her to succeed. But success hadn't made her forget where she came from. Every morning, Sarah still drove past that grocery store where she used to live. Mrs. Chen was gone now, and the building had been torn down to make room for luxury condos that people like. Her grandmother could never afford. But Sarah remembered. She remembered what it felt like to be invisible, to be dismissed, to be judged by her appearance rather than her character. That Tuesday morning, as she waited for the light to turn green, Sarah was thinking about the cases on her docket. There was a young man facing drug charges who reminded her of her son Marcus. There was an elderly woman being evicted from her apartment who reminded her of Grandma Rose. There was a police officer facing charges for excessive force who reminded her that justice was complicated and sometimes painful. Sarah believed deeply that the courthouse was a place where everyone deserved to be treated with dignity, regardless of their race, their income, or their past mistakes. She had seen too many judges who looked down on defendants, too many prosecutors who cared more about conviction rates than truth, too many defense attorneys who gave up before they started fighting. In her courtroom, things were different. Sarah listened to everyone with the same attention and respect. She asked questions that got to the heart of matters. She made sure everyone understood what was happening and why. She believed that justice wasn't just about following the law. It was about treating people the way they deserved to be treated as human beings. The light turned green, and Sarah pressed the gas pedal gently. Her Mercedes was 6 months old, purchased with money she had saved for 3 years. It was the nicest car she had ever owned, and sometimes she still couldn't believe it was really hers. David had teased her about being afraid to drive it anywhere for fear of getting a scratch, but Sarah was just grateful to have something reliable that started every morning and got her to work safely. As she drove down Main Street toward the courthouse, Sarah noticed a police car in her rearview mirror. Officer Mike Peterson was behind the wheel, though she didn't know his name yet. She had no way of knowing that this encounter would change both of their lives forever. Mike Peterson had been having the worst year of his 15-year career with the Millbrook Police Department. He had been passed over for promotion to sergeant 3 times, and each rejection stung more than the last. His younger colleagues were advancing while he seemed stuck in the same patrol car, driving the same streets, dealing with the same problems day after day. Mike's frustration had been building for months. He blamed his supervisors for not recognizing his experience. He blamed the city council for their political correctness in hiring and promotion decisions. He blamed the community activists who criticized police officers every time they tried to do their jobs. Most of all, he blamed the changing demographics of Millbrook, which had become more diverse over the past decade as new families moved in from larger cities. What Mike didn't want to admit, even to himself, was that his attitude had become bitter and cynical. He saw threats everywhere and treated routine encounters like potential battles. His reports were filled with aggressive language, and his body camera footage showed a pattern of escalation rather than de-escalation. That morning, Mike had started his shift already angry. He had argued with his wife about money before leaving home. He had been assigned to patrol the downtown area, which he considered boring compared to the real police work happening in other parts of the city. When the dispatcher announced a stolen vehicle report for a black luxury sedan, Mike perked up with interest. Finally, he thought, a chance to do some actual police work instead of writing parking tickets and directing traffic. The stolen car report was sketchy at best. An elderly man had called 911 to report that he thought he saw someone breaking into a car in a parking garage. But when police arrived, the car was gone and there were no witnesses. The caller couldn't even provide a complete license plate number, but Mike was eager for action, and when he saw Sarah's Mercedes, his adrenaline started pumping. A black woman driving an expensive car in the courthouse district at 8:30 in the morning struck Mike as suspicious, though he couldn't have explained exactly why. His training should have told him to run the license plate first and check for any actual evidence of wrongdoing. But Mike's judgment was clouded by his frustrations and his unconscious biases. He turned on his emergency lights and followed Sarah as she carefully pulled over to the curb. As Mike walked toward Sarah's car, his hand instinctively moved to rest on his service weapon. This gesture, captured on multiple phone cameras from bystanders, would later become one of the most discussed aspects of the entire incident. Sarah saw the officer approaching in her side mirror and felt her stomach tighten with familiar anxiety. This wasn't her first traffic stop, and experience had taught her that these encounters could go wrong very quickly if she wasn't careful. She had been pulled over 17 times in her adult life, and in every single case she had been released without a ticket once officers realized they had no legitimate reason for stopping her. But each of those encounters had left her feeling humiliated and angry, wondering if her children would face the same treatment when they started driving. The difference this time was that Sarah was no longer just a private citizen trying to get to work. She was Judge Sarah Williams, and she had spent the last 3 years earning the respect of her community through fair and thoughtful decisions from the bench. She had built relationships with law enforcement, prosecutors, defense, attorneys, and community leaders who valued her judgment and integrity. But as Officer Peterson approached her window with aggressive body language and his hand on his weapon, Sarah realized that none of her achievements or relationships would matter if this encounter went badly. She took a deep breath and prepared herself for what was about to unfold, having no idea that this moment would test everything she believed about justice, dignity, and the power of grace under pressure. The morning sun was beginning to break through the rain clouds, casting long shadows across the street where two very different life stories were about to collide in a way that would echo far beyond the borders of Millbrook County. At 52 years old, Sarah had worked her entire life to reach this position. Growing up in a small apartment with her grandmother, she had dreamed of becoming a lawyer since she was 8 years old. Her grandmother used to tell her, "Sarah, baby, education is the one thing nobody can take away from you." Those words had carried her through law school, through years as a public defender, and finally to her appointment as a judge 3 years ago. She was the first black woman to serve as a judge in Millbrook County, and she took that responsibility seriously every single day. The light turned green, and Sarah drove toward the courthouse. She noticed a police car following behind her, but thought nothing of it. Police cars were common sights around the courthouse area. Suddenly, red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Sarah looked at her speedometer. She was going exactly 25 miles per hour in a 25-mile zone. Her hands gripped the steering wheel as she carefully pulled over to the side of the road. Officer Mike Peterson stepped out of his patrol car. He had been a police officer in Millbrook for 15 years and had a reputation for being tough on crime. What people didn't know was that Mike had been passed over for promotion 3 times in the past 2 years. He was angry and looking for someone to blame for his problems. Mike walked up to Sarah's car window with an aggressive stride. He didn't bother to check her license plate or look at her properly before he started talking. "Step out of the vehicle," Mike shouted, his hand resting on his gun belt. Sarah rolled down her window slowly. "Good morning, officer. May I ask why you stopped me?" "I said step out of the car. This vehicle matches the description of a stolen car reported this morning." Sarah's heart began to race. She had dealt with situations like this before, but never while she was a sitting judge. "Officer, I can assure you this is my car. I have all the proper paperwork." "Ma'am, I need you to step out of the vehicle right now," Mike repeated, his voice getting louder. "Keep your hands where I can see them." Sarah took a deep breath. She remembered her grandmother's words about staying calm in difficult situations. "Stay strong, Sarah," she whispered to herself. As she stepped out of her car, Sarah noticed several people had stopped to watch. Some were taking videos with their phones. She stood tall and kept her hands visible. "This is my vehicle, officer. I purchased it 6 months ago from Henderson Mercedes dealership downtown. I can show you my registration and insurance papers." Mike looked at Sarah with suspicion. "Yeah, right. That's what they all say. Put your hands behind your back." "Excuse me?" Sarah's voice remained calm but firm. "Officer, you have made a mistake. I am Judge Sarah Williams, and this is my car." Mike laughed loudly. "Sure you are, lady, and I'm the President of the United States. Turn around and put your hands behind your back." The crowd was getting larger now. Sarah could hear people whispering and see more phones recording the incident. She knew this moment would define not just her day, but possibly her entire career. "Officer Peterson," Sarah said, reading his name tag, "I am going to reach into my purse very slowly to get my identification. Please do not be alarmed." "I told you to put your hands behind your back," Mike yelled. "You're under arrest for possession of stolen property and resisting arrest." Sarah's mind raced. She thought about her grandmother, who had faced much worse discrimination in her lifetime. She thought about all the young black children who would see this video and wonder if they could ever really make it in America. She thought about her responsibility as a judge to uphold justice, even in this moment. "Officer Peterson," Sarah said in her strongest judge voice, "I am ordering you to step back and allow me to show you my identification." Something in her voice made Mike pause. Sarah slowly reached into her purse and pulled out her judicial identification badge and her driver's license. "I am the Honorable Sarah Williams, Judge of the Millbrook County Superior Court. This is my car, and you have made a serious error." Mike looked at the badge, then at Sarah, then back at the badge. His face turned red, then white, then red again. The crowd had grown to about 30 people, and everyone was recording. "This has to be fake," Mike stammered. "There's no way you're a judge." Sarah held up her phone. "Officer Peterson, I am going to call Sheriff Martinez right now. He will confirm my identity. In the meantime, I suggest you radio your dispatcher and check the license plate on this vehicle." Mike's hands were shaking as he grabbed his radio. "Dispatch, can you run a plate for me? License number SAW 2024. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. "That vehicle is registered to Judge Sarah Williams, 1247 Oak Street, Millbrook. No wants or warrants. Vehicle is not stolen." The crowd erupted in murmurs and gasps. Mike stood frozen, realizing the magnitude of his mistake. Sarah walked closer to Mike, her judicial ID still in her hand. "Officer Peterson, in my courtroom, I have seen many people make mistakes. Some mistakes can be forgiven and learned from. Others show a pattern of behavior that cannot be ignored." Mike tried to speak, but no words came out. "This morning, you assumed that because I am a black woman driving a nice car, I must have stolen it. You didn't check the license plate first. You didn't ask for my identification politely. You immediately treated me like a criminal." Sarah's voice was steady but filled with emotion. "Officer Peterson, do you know how many times I have been stopped by police in my lifetime for no reason other than the color of my skin?" Mike shook his head. 17 times, Officer Peterson. 17 times before today. Each time, I showed my identification politely. Each time I answered questions respectfully. Each time I went home and wondered if my children would face the same treatment when they grew up." The crowd was completely silent now, hanging on every word. "But today is different, Officer Peterson. Today I am not just Sarah Williams, a black woman driving to work. Today I am Judge Sarah Williams, and I have the power to ensure that justice is served." Sarah pulled out her phone and dialed a number. "Sheriff Martinez, this is Judge Williams. I need you to come to the corner of Main Street and Oak Avenue immediately. I have a situation that requires your personal attention." Within 5 minutes, Sheriff Martinez arrived with 2 other officers. He walked straight to Sarah with a look of concern and respect. "Judge Williams, what happened here?" Sarah explained the entire incident calmly and professionally. Sheriff Martinez listened carefully, occasionally glancing at Mike, who stood pale and silent. "Officer Peterson," Sheriff Martinez said sternly, "is Judge Williams's account accurate?" Mike nodded slowly, unable to speak. "Judge Williams," Sheriff Martinez said, "I want to personally apologize for this incident. This behavior is completely unacceptable and does not represent the values of our department." Sarah looked at the crowd, then at Mike, then at Sheriff Martinez. "Sheriff, I appreciate your apology. However, an apology is not enough. This incident was recorded by multiple witnesses. It will be on social media within the hour. The question is, what are you going to do to ensure this never happens again?" Sheriff Martinez straightened his shoulders. "Judge Williams, effective immediately, Officer Peterson is suspended pending a full investigation. If the investigation confirms what happened here today, he will be terminated." Mike finally found his voice. Sheriff, please. I made a mistake. I have 15 years on the force. I have a family to support. Sarah turned to face Mike directly. Officer Peterson, I also have a family. I have 2 teenage children who will see this video and wonder if their mother's achievements mean anything. In this world, I have a community that looks up to me as a symbol that the justice system can work for everyone. She paused, letting her words sink in. Your mistake wasn't just pulling me over. Your mistake was assuming that justice doesn't apply equally to all people. The crowd began to clap slowly, then louder and louder. Sarah raised her hand for silence. But I want everyone here to understand something important. This incident, as painful as it is, shows us that we still have work to do. We cannot let anger consume us. We must let justice guide us. Sarah turned back to Sheriff Martinez. Sheriff, I want Officer Peterson to undergo extensive bias training. I want him to spend time in my courtroom observing how justice should work. And I want him to speak at community meetings about what he learned from this experience. Everyone was surprised, including Mike. Judge Williams, Sheriff Martinez said, that's very generous. But after what happened today, termination might be more appropriate. Sarah shook her head. Sheriff, if we fire Officer Peterson, he learns nothing. The community learns nothing. Another person takes his place, and the same problems continue. She looked directly at Mike. Officer Peterson, I am giving you a choice. You can accept termination and move on with your life, or you can accept responsibility for your actions, complete bias training, and work to become the kind of officer this community deserves. Mike's eyes filled with tears. Judge Williams, I don't understand why you would give me a second chance after what I did to you today. Sarah's voice softened slightly. Officer Peterson, my grandmother used to tell me that the measure of a person is not whether they fall down, but whether they get back up and do better. Today, you fell down. The question is, what are you going to do now? Mike wiped his eyes. Judge Williams, I accept full responsibility for my actions. I want to do the training. I want to learn. I want to be better. Sheriff Martinez looked amazed. Judge Williams, your wisdom and grace in this situation is remarkable. Sarah smiled for the first time that morning. Sheriff, justice isn't about punishment alone. It's about creating a world where incidents like this don't happen to the next person. She turned to address the crowd. Everyone who witnessed this today has a responsibility too. We must demand better from our law enforcement. We must vote in elections. We must speak up when we see injustice. We must teach our children that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. The crowd erupted in applause again. Sarah walked back to her car, then turned around one more time. Officer Peterson, I will see you in my courtroom next Monday morning. Don't be late. As she drove away, Sarah thought about her grandmother, who had passed away 5 years earlier. Grandma, she said out loud, I hope I made you proud today. Her phone rang. It was her daughter calling from college. Mom, someone posted a video of you online. It's going viral. Mom, I am so proud of you. Sarah smiled. Baby, today wasn't about me. It was about making sure the next person doesn't have to go through what I went through. Mom, you're a hero. No, sweetheart. I'm just a woman who believes in justice for everyone. When Sarah arrived at the courthouse, she found dozens of people waiting for her. Court staff, lawyers, and community members had all come to show their support. Judge Williams, called out Attorney Janet Morrison, we saw the video. We wanted you to know that we stand with you. Sarah walked up the courthouse steps, surrounded by supporters. Thank you all, but remember this. What happened to me today happens to people every day who don't have a judicial ID badge. We must fight for them too. Inside her chambers, Sarah sat at her desk and opened her grandmother's Bible, which she kept there every day. Inside the front cover, her grandmother had written, Sarah, baby, when God gives you a platform, use it to lift others up. That afternoon, local news stations called for interviews. National news networks wanted to talk to her. Social media was buzzing with the story. Sarah decided to hold a press conference at 4 p.m. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sarah began, facing a room full of reporters. "Today I experienced something that happens to Black Americans every day. I was presumed guilty because of my race. The only difference is that I had a badge that forced Officer Peterson to see me as a human being worthy of respect." She paused, letting her words resonate. "But here's what I want everyone to understand. I should not need a badge for Officer Peterson to treat me with dignity. No one should. Today we have an opportunity to turn this painful experience into positive change." A reporter raised her hand. "Judge Williams, many people are calling for Officer Peterson to be fired immediately. Why did you suggest alternative consequences?" Sarah leaned forward. "Because firing him doesn't fix the problem. Training him, educating him, and holding him accountable does fix the problem. If Officer Peterson becomes a better officer because of today, then other people won't have to experience what I experienced." Another reporter asked, "Judge Williams, do you think Officer Peterson's behavior was motivated by racism?" Sarah took a deep breath. "I think Officer Peterson made assumptions based on stereotypes and bias. Whether that was conscious racism or unconscious bias, the result was the same. I was treated unfairly. The important thing now is that he learns from this experience and grows." After the press conference, Sarah went home to her family. Her son Marcus, who was a senior in high school, was waiting for her. "Mom, everyone at school saw the video. They're all talking about how strong you were." Sarah hugged her son. "Marcus, strength isn't about never being afraid. Strength is about doing the right thing even when you are afraid." "Were you scared, Mom?" Sarah nodded. "Yes, baby, I was terrified. But I knew that how I handled that situation would affect not just me, but everyone who looks like us." That evening, Sarah received a call from Officer Peterson. "Judge Williams, this is Mike Peterson. I wanted to call and apologize again for what happened today. I also wanted to thank you." "Thank me?" Sarah was surprised. "Judge Williams, you could have destroyed my career today. Instead, you gave me a chance to learn and grow. I promise you that I will not waste this opportunity." Sarah sat in her favorite chair, the same one where Grandma Rose used to read her bedtime stories. "Officer Peterson, I believe people can change. I believe you can become the kind of officer this community needs, but you have to do the work." "I will, Judge Williams. I promise I will." The next morning, Sarah woke up to find her phone buzzing with notifications. The video had been shared over 100,000 times overnight. News stations from 3 different states wanted interviews. Her email inbox was flooded with messages from people around the country. One message stood out from the rest. It was from a young Black law student at Harvard University. "Dear Judge Williams," the message read, "my name is Keisha Johnson. I saw your video this morning, and I wanted you to know that you are the reason I decided to become a lawyer. 3 years ago, I was a freshman in college with no direction. I happened to see a speech you gave at a law school graduation about justice and equality. Your words changed my life. Yesterday, you showed the world what real strength and grace look like. Thank you for being the role model I needed." Sarah wiped tears from her eyes as she read the message. She forwarded it to her husband, David, who was already at work at the community center where he counseled at-risk youth. David called her immediately. "Sarah, do you see what you've done? This is bigger than just you and Officer Peterson. This is about hope." "I know, baby, but I'm scared too. What if people expect too much from me now? What if I can't live up to what they think I represent?" "Sarah Williams," David said with the same firm voice he used when counseling teenagers, "you have been living up to what you represent your entire life. Don't you dare start doubting yourself now." At the courthouse that day, Sarah found flowers, cards, and gifts covering her secretary's desk. Her secretary, Margaret, had worked at the courthouse for 25 years and had never seen anything like it. Judge Williams, people have been calling all morning. The mayor wants to give you a key to the city. The NAACP wants you to speak at their annual dinner. 3 universities want to give you honorary degrees. Sarah felt overwhelmed. Margaret, I just want to do my job. I just want to serve justice. Judge Williams, Margaret said with a smile, sometimes serving justice means accepting the platform God has given you to make a difference. Over the next few weeks, the story continued to grow. Sarah's phone rang constantly with interview requests. Publishers wanted her to write a book. Movie producers wanted to option her story. But what mattered most to Sarah were the personal stories that people shared with her. A teacher from California wrote to tell her about using the video in her classroom to teach about dignity and respect. A police chief from Texas called to ask her advice on bias training for his officers. A grandmother from Georgia sent a handwritten letter saying that Sarah had given her hope that things could get better for her grandchildren. But the most powerful response came from someone Sarah never expected to hear from. 3 weeks after the incident, Sarah was in her chambers preparing for court when her secretary knocked on the door. Judge Williams, there's someone here to see you. She says it's personal. The woman who walked into Sarah's office was elderly, with silver hair and kind eyes that reminded Sarah of her grandmother. She moved slowly, using a walker to steady herself. Judge Williams, my name is Dorothy Peterson. I'm Officer Peterson's mother. Sarah stood up immediately and offered the woman a chair. Mrs. Peterson, please sit down. Can I get you some water or coffee? Dorothy Peterson sat down carefully and looked directly at Sarah. Judge Williams, I came here to apologize for my son's behavior. I also came to thank you. Sarah leaned forward. Mrs. Peterson, you don't owe me an apology for your son's actions. Yes, I do, Dorothy said firmly. I raised that boy to be better than what he showed you that day. His father and I taught him to treat all people with respect, regardless of their color or background. Somewhere along the way, he lost sight of those lessons. Dorothy reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. This is a picture of me and my husband at a civil rights march in 1965. We believed then, and I still believe now, that all people deserve to be treated with dignity. Sarah looked at the photograph showing a young white couple holding hands, with black protesters, all of them linking arms in solidarity. Mrs. Peterson, I had no idea. Mike doesn't know about this picture, Dorothy continued. After his father died 5 years ago, Mike became angry and bitter. He blamed the world for his problems instead of looking in the mirror. But what you did that day, the grace you showed him, it reminded him of the man his father and I raised him to be. Dorothy reached across the desk and took Sarah's hand. Judge Williams, you could have ruined my son's life that day. Instead, you saved it. You saved him from becoming someone he was never meant to be. Tears filled Sarah's eyes. Mrs. Peterson, your son has to do the work to change. I can't do that for him. I know, Dorothy smiled. But you gave him a chance to do that work. You gave him hope that he could be better. That's more than he deserved, and more than most people would have given him. As Dorothy Peterson prepared to leave, she turned back to Sarah one more time. Judge Williams, I want you to know that there are more people like me and my late husband than you might think. White people who believe in justice and equality. We don't always speak up when we should, but we're here. We're watching. We're supporting you. After Dorothy left, Sarah sat alone in her chambers, thinking about the complexity of the human heart. She thought about how easy it would have been to write off Officer Peterson as just another racist cop. She thought about how his mother's visit had reminded her that everyone has a story, everyone has influences that shape who they become. That afternoon in court, Sarah presided over the case of Marcus Thompson, a 19-year-old black man charged with shoplifting. The prosecutor was recommending 30 days in jail. The defense attorney was asking for community service. Sarah looked at Marcus and saw her son. She saw herself at 19, making mistakes and needing someone to believe she could do better. "Mr. Thompson," Sarah said, "this is your first offense. The court is going to give you a choice. You can accept 30 days in jail, or you can accept 100 hours of community service, attend counseling sessions to address whatever led you to make this choice, and write a letter of apology to the store owner." Marcus chose the community service. After court, the prosecutor approached Sarah's bench. "Judge Williams, with all due respect, don't you think you're being too lenient? We need to send a message." Sarah looked at the prosecutor, a young white man fresh out of law school. "Counselor, what message do you think 30 days in jail sends to a 19-year-old first-time offender? What does that accomplish besides putting another young black man in the system?" The prosecutor looked uncomfortable. "Judge Williams, I just think—" "Counselor," Sarah interrupted gently, "I think what happened to me 3 weeks ago has taught this community something about the danger of assumptions. Let's not assume that punishment is always the answer when rehabilitation might work better." That evening, Sarah drove home thinking about the ripple effects of that Tuesday morning encounter. Officer Peterson was in week 2 of his bias training. The Millbrook Police Department had announced new policies for traffic stops. The city council was planning community meetings about police-community relations. But the changes weren't just happening in official meetings and training sessions. They were happening in individual hearts and minds, one conversation at a time. When Sarah arrived home, she found her son Marcus waiting for her in the kitchen. He was packing for college, but he had something on his mind. "Mom, I need to tell you something." Sarah sat down at the kitchen table where they had shared thousands of meals and conversations over the years. "What is it, baby?" "Mom, last year when I was driving to basketball practice, a police officer pulled me over. He said I was speeding, but I know I wasn't. He made me get out of the car. He searched me. He called me boy and told me to keep my mouth shut." Sarah's heart broke. "Marcus, why didn't you tell me?" "Because I was embarrassed, because I was scared, because I thought if I told you, you would worry about me even more than you already do." Marcus continued, "But after what happened to you, after seeing how you handled it, I realized something. Mom, you didn't just stand up for yourself that day. You stood up for me. You stood up for every black person who has been in that situation." Sarah reached across the table and took her son's hand. "Marcus, I am so sorry that happened to you. I am sorry I didn't know. I am sorry that even with everything I've achieved, I couldn't protect you from that experience. Mom, don't apologize. What you did that day, the strength you showed, the way you chose education over revenge, that's going to protect me and kids like me in the future. That's going to make sure other officers think twice before they treat someone the way Officer Peterson treated you." 3 months later, Sarah was invited to speak at the National Conference of Black Judges in Atlanta. She stood before 200 of her peers, people who had walked similar paths and faced similar challenges. "Sisters and brothers," Sarah began, "3 months ago, I thought I was just driving to work. I had no idea that I was driving toward a moment that would define not just my career, but my purpose." She talked about the incident, about her choice to seek justice through education, rather than punishment, about the changes that had resulted in her community. "But here's what I want you to remember," Sarah concluded. "The real victory wasn't that Officer Peterson kept his job or that he went through training. The real victory was that we showed the world what happens when we respond to injustice with wisdom instead of anger, with grace instead of revenge." After her speech, a young black female judge from Louisiana approached her. "Judge Williams, I have a confession to make. 2 weeks ago, I had my own encounter with a police officer who treated me unfairly. My first instinct was to use my position to get him fired. But then I remembered your story. Instead, I asked to speak with his supervisor. We arranged for him to spend a day in my courtroom, observing how the justice system is supposed to work. Yesterday, he sent me a thank you note, saying that experience changed his perspective on the people he encounters in his job." Sarah smiled. That's how change really happens. Not through grand gestures or viral videos, but through individual moments of choosing to believe that people can grow. 6 months later, Officer Peterson completed his bias training and began working with community groups to improve police-community relations. He spoke at schools and community centers about the importance of treating everyone with respect and dignity. His transformation wasn't perfect or immediate. There were setbacks and difficult moments. But slowly, with consistent effort and support from colleagues who believed in his capacity to change, Mike Peterson became the kind of officer the Millbrook community deserved. Judge Sarah Williams continued to serve on the bench, but now she also traveled around the country speaking about justice, equality, and the power of grace in the face of injustice. She wrote a book titled The Long Road to Justice, which became a bestseller and was used in law schools and police academies across the nation. Her story became a symbol of how one person's dignity and strength can create positive change in the world. The video of that Tuesday morning encounter was viewed millions of times. People from around the world sent messages of support and inspiration, but for Sarah, the most important outcome was much simpler. 1 year after the incident, she was driving through downtown Millbrook when she saw Officer Peterson directing traffic at a school crosswalk. He was smiling and high-fiving children as they crossed the street. A young black girl, probably about 8 years old, walked up to him. "Officer Peterson, my mommy says you're one of the good cops now." Mike knelt down to the little girl's eye level. "I'm trying to be, sweetheart. I'm trying to be the kind of police officer you deserve." Sarah pulled over and watched the interaction for a few more minutes. She saw Officer Peterson helping. An elderly woman crossed the street. She saw him waving at parents dropping their children off at school. She saw him treating everyone with the same respect and kindness. As she prepared to drive away, Officer Peterson noticed her car and walked over to her window. "Judge Williams," he said with genuine warmth, "how are you today?" "I'm well, Officer Peterson. How are you?" "Judge Williams, I want you to know that not a day goes by that I don't think about what you taught me. You saved my career, but more importantly, you saved my soul." Sarah smiled. "Officer Peterson, you saved yourself. I just gave you the opportunity to remember who you really are." That night, Sarah sat in her garden behind the house she and David had bought in the same neighborhood where she grew up. The old apartment building was gone, but the community was still there. Still strong, still full of families working hard to build better lives for their children. She opened her grandmother's Bible and read the words written inside. "Sarah, baby, when God gives you a platform, use it to lift others up." "I tried, Grandma," Sarah whispered. "I really tried." As she looked up at the stars, Sarah thought about all the people whose lives had been touched by that one morning encounter. Officer Peterson and his family. The young people who had seen the video and felt inspired to stand up for justice. The police officers around the country who had examined their own biases and committed to doing better. The judges who had been reminded of their power to choose mercy alongside justice. Most importantly, she thought about her own children and grandchildren she hoped to have someday. They would grow up in a world where that video existed as proof that dignity and grace could triumph over hatred and fear. Outside her window, the stars shone brightly over Millbrook, a town that had learned, slowly but surely, that justice truly has no color.